Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and I will never skip a Kesha song. I just can't do it. All right, let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome one and all to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I am pumped to be here today. Today is an interview that I never thought was going to happen, and I just totally fangirled out the entire time. I had a blast, and I know that you're going to enjoy this one too. But first, this week was a good week for me. This week was a good week for my photography. This good week was this. I'm just referring to last week as this good week. This good week was a great week for me personally to grow. I had a blast. I brewed some beer. I brewed beer. It says in my intro, I'm a home brewer. I haven't brewed. This is really embarrassing for me to say. I haven't brewed for over a year. And yet, every single week I come out with a new episode that says, hey, I'm Raymond. I'm a home brewer. And here I am being a total hypocrite, not brewing beer. Why was I not brewing beer? We moved houses. The last house we were at, it was very cumbersome to get everything out. It's no excuse. We're in the new house. We have the space. I had the time. I brewed beer, and it was wonderful. It was a very enjoyable experience. Everything went smooth. This was the first time. Everything went smoothly. I think I've learned from all of my lessons previously. I had everything laid out. It was ready to go. And if you followed me on Instagram, you would have seen my Instagram story of my entire brewing process. And I hope that I taught you something about brewing beer. But if I didn't, that's fine. If you didn't even watch it, that's fine. Because you know what? At the end of the day, I brewed beer. I was excited about it. I had fun. And that's all that matters. Guess what? It is time for a brand new iTunes review. This week, it comes from Jesse B in Pennsylvania. Jesse, oh man. Okay, hold on to your butts. This is a long one. Here we go. Jesse says, I'm someone who recently has been trying to perfect taking better photos of my family while also trying my hand at turning my lifelong hobby into a photography side business. Totally understandable. Over the past several months, I've been scouring the internet for resources I could find, hoping that just one more video, one more podcast, one more article would give me that final pearl of wisdom I needed to finally get it and break through my own self-doubt. That's how I was when I started this podcast, but my outlook has completely changed over the first just few episodes I listened to. Now, many episodes in, the combination of Raymond's at-ease and incredibly relatable personality, thank you, Jesse, the way he interviews highly successful photographers from around the world, along with his enthusiasm and encouragement, have helped me to realize settings and technical aspects are such a small part of taking a great photo. Did you hear that? Oh my gosh. Every episode leaves me feeling more inspired than I thought possible. Aside from the invaluable interviews with a wide variety of guests, he also runs an amazingly non-judgmental and collaborative Facebook group for other photographers. The name may say beginner, but like many things in life, there's always something more to learn. And this podcast is fantastic for those of any skill level. And despite being a professional photographer himself, Raymond is so humble and enthusiastic at what he himself learns during his interviews. I'm probably one of the most humble people I've ever met. Thank you for picking up on that, Jesse. It is impossible to not feed off that energy. And now I look forward to every Monday, unlike I have ever done before, because of this podcast. Thank you, Raymond. No, Jesse, thank you. Holy cow. I can't imagine how long that would have taken to write or put together in your brain the accumulation of words that came out here in this amazing iTunes review. Jesse, thank you so much for that review. Seriously, wow, that was everything that I've been trying to do with this podcast, everything that I've been trying to promote from what I've learned coming up as a new photographer, that the settings and the technicals are such a small part of every single great photo. I cannot believe that you picked up on that, and I'm so happy that you did. Jesse, thank you so much. That's it. Jesse left an incredible 5-star review, as you just heard, and you know what? That is what keeps me going. Your reviews, you listening right now in your car, you're driving to work right now, you're at the gym. Your reviews really, it keeps me going because it lets me know that I'm on the right track. So if you have picked up anything from this podcast, I cannot tell you how grateful I would be if you were to leave a review in iTunes or whatever podcast player that you're listening to. That's it. Thank you, Jesse, again for that review. We're going to get into this interview right now. It is with Ryan Brenizer. And Ryan Brenizer is a photographer who, if you don't know who he is, I don't know what to say. You know, it really depends on how deep you really dive into photography. I guess I didn't really learn about him till later. But my point is that to me, he is a huge photographer who I have learned so much from in the space of inspiration and just being creative. Through following creativity, he has discovered a method that creates an image that is very unique. You've heard me talk about it, and if you've been in the Facebook group, you've seen me even create a Brenizer photo as well. But I'll let Ryan get into what his photo is. I do want to say this interview is more relaxed. It's more long form. So this is very much just a conversation between two photographers, and if we get a little off track, then I apologize. But I was having so much fun talking to Ryan that I guess I didn't reel in the direction of the podcast episode as much as I should have. But nonetheless, I know that you are going to get so much great information out of this podcast. So we're just going to go ahead and get on into it right now. Here we are with Ryan Brenizer. Today's guest is an icon in the world of wedding and portrait photography. Having covered each U.S. president since Clinton, during his coverage, he has been blessed by the Pope, stared down by Muhammad Ali, I cannot imagine what that was like, and had his photos of Smokey Robinson featured in the Kennedy Center Lifetime Tribute Ceremony. He is ranked as one of the top 10 wedding photographers in the world by two of the top industry magazines, both American Photo and Rangefinder. Ryan Brenizer, I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Obviously, you are an extremely busy guy. I've heard on plenty of other podcasts the amount of weddings that you shoot in a year is just bananas, and I couldn't even imagine doing anything like that. But just kind of to give the listeners an idea of how busy you are, how many weddings do you shoot a year, and how busy do you keep yourself?
So over the course of most of my career, I averaged about 65 weddings a year. And that is, I'm only counting, full day, full-time weddings. And in fact, over all of that career as well, my default was a full day schedule, right? This is all up into, let's say, we'll get into why some things have changed and some have not in the past year, for a pretty big reason. And so, so you're talking, 65, up to like, mid 70s, but each wedding could be up to, probably an average of around 12 hours, but sometimes as far as 20, if in case of Sikh weddings, which are like 4 a.m. to midnight. And so, including up to, as many full day weddings in a row as 5. We went to a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So, there's a lot of endurance built into it, and but in addition to things like just not breaking down physically, the biggest thing that helps endurance is loving what you do. So there's a lot of things that we focused on is not only loving it in the first place, but then focusing on the things that we love in such a way that, literally 1,000 weddings later, we still love, being there in the day and doing the job, more than we ever have. It's trying to take what we all started out as. I mean, 98% of people in the business of photography are in it because they love photography, not because they said like, oh, I love business so much. What could I do? Like, oh, maybe photography seems good. And so, so you start with that passion, right? And so the hardest thing especially for people who've been in the business a long time, when is making this into something that is, carries you through and allows you to eat food and pay rent and all of that good stuff. But, keeping that initial passion that you had, that made you want to do this in the first place.
Of course.
And so, yeah. And so, a few things have changed in recent years, and are continuing to change. But the biggest one really is I myself got married. Actually, I got married 3 times to the same person. And so we wanted to do all the research on various kinds of weddings. So we had an elopement, we had a nice family dinner, and we had a big 250-person party. She's also a longtime photographer and is now, independently, and in addition to all this, she's right over there, by the way, and moving a bed. That's why so we merged our businesses, because not only do we love each other and love spending time together, but we really loved the product that we were turning out together. And, when wedding photography, one of the important things is that you're doing a great job, absolutely no matter what is going on in the day, with the weather, with the timing, with things, whatever's happening with the logistics. And, anytime we were working together, I just, entering the day, I just knew, we've got this. It's going to be great, whatever happens. And every time she wasn't there, I said oh, I wish you were at this wedding that I was at. And she would say the same thing, oh my God, this wedding, you should have been there. And so we said, okay, let's merge, let's do this. And so there was that. And now we are now proud, fairly new parents of a 7-month-old who is powered by nuclear fusion. And that, if you thought getting married, changing things, it's cliched, but that changes so much more. And so there are little tweaks that we've made to the business, because we know, and tweaks that we keep making because, we know that when he's in school in, 5-6 years, we're not going to want to be gone every Saturday and Sunday.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that will eventually mean some things, a little bit of change in structure of the business model. But just for now, we've said, what, if people want to have us for a little bit of less time than 14 hours, we can do that too. So that's been one thing that's been a new option, and we've been making that work as well. And we've got a lot of things on the table, especially because, of course, ourselves, we're seeing in our own lives how the wedding is really just the beginning part of the story. Mm-hmm. And, I've always been really interested in how does this continue on? I'm interested in it in our life. I'm interested in it in people's lives in general. And also with our specific clients. I always love coming back and seeing them and seeing the families that they're raising. And, sometimes we'll do weddings for the sibling of a previous client, and they come back and they've got a 7-year-old, and my God, this is ridiculous. I shot your parents' wedding. They were crazy drunk on the dance floor, and now they've got a 7-year-old. And so those would be things that we're starting to explore as well. But and the thing is, we're both really, really genuinely super passionate to shoot and just love being at weddings and being with these people. And part of that is just it's partially luck in a way that we happen to like these sort of things, but it's mostly based on making a series of choices throughout our careers and our business to say okay, steering us this way is going to make me love what I do more or just as much as I do now, and steering this way, even if it looks like there's a pile of money over here, is going to make me not love this anymore. And and that's really the worst thing. And that's the thing that, the shores of, that's the Scylla and the Charybdis, the rocky shores of a wedding photography career are scattered with many, many fine photographers who, made some of these choices and said, what, I can't do this anymore. I can't look at another wedding dress. And so that's been something that's been really big for us.
Yeah. I can tell you that I know several photographers who, just like that, they got into it too strong, and either they chased the money or they chased, I guess, the Pinterest perfect wedding, even though it was against how they wanted to tell that story, and then they got burnt out as well. So that's really interesting to hear. I kind of want to know, obviously your first year you didn't start off, at least I'm assuming, shooting 65 weddings. So
no, took a little while.
How did you get your start into photography?
Yeah, so first of all, again, there's life is that I live in New York and I have a 7-month-old, so life will continue to happen in the background as we talk. So first of all, just like directly on the question, for people who are like looking into specifically wedding photography, when you're starting, it's a slow rolling snowball, because, let's say you have the fastest, most meteoric possible, start of a business in wedding photography. You go to a wedding show, you say, I'll do your wedding. I'm a good photographer. I'll do your wedding for $50. And 50 people book you. I'm like, great, you have 50 weddings. But you know what? Like, that money, whatever it is, that's not going to come in for another 6 months. Mm-hmm. So the fastest possible rise, 6 to 18 months when these people start booking you, is very different than, say, oh, I'd like to do your portrait. Can I photograph you later today? And so that's something that's, shocking to people, is like how slow it takes to get into it. It always does. And knowing, even the people, I had a fairly quick rise, and I know people that have even quicker rises, and there are reasons that happened, and I can get into the short answer is, like, if you want to have a quick rise into wedding photography, like, already be famous. A friend of mine, Jonas, who like had a very, very quick rise, still takes a number of years. He was already like the most popular blogger in Australia or Sweden, and most popular, and that helps, right? But even that, it takes a while to build, which is good, because it's also going to take you a while to build your skills and to build your aesthetic entering into this new era. So like you're no matter how many times you click this shutter before, entering to weddings, dealing with these new kinds of challenges and doing these new things, you're going to like look back at some of your work and be like, oh boy, I'm glad I wasn't charging as much. I'm glad I wasn't doing as much before I had a lot more under my belt. So that's to the specific question. Just going back to like how I got into photography. Way back when, in the era when film cameras were just called cameras, I was little things here and there. My father was an avid photographer, camera collector. My mother actually was the family documentarian that people would make fun of, because she would take probably an average of 2 rolls of film a week, and people would be like, How could you ever need that many photos? How could you ever need to take 50 photos a week, several photos per day? Who would take that many photos? And now, of course, you go out to lunch and you take 600. Yeah. I mean, they say, and statistics keep updating, but certainly, 99% of all the photos that have ever been taken have been taken in the last 5 years, right. And on phones. So everything has changed. Even since I started wedding photography, let alone when I started photography. And so I started, I started as a writer and editor, where, at small newspapers. And so, when you're working at a small publication, first student publications, college newspapers, and then I actually went straight out of college and became like the editor-in-chief of a newspaper within 6 months, but it was not a big one. And so when you're at that level, you're kind of doing everything. Uh, you do the graphic design, and you write the stories, and you also take photos.
Mm-hmm.
And so pretty soon, right after college, I just found myself, covering President Clinton and his family for a week when Hillary Clinton was running for Senate in 2000. And here I am. I'm mostly there as a writer, and I had the tenacity of a journalist, but at that time, relatively little specific know-how as a photographer, other than I knew what I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And so I vividly remember, again, here I am right out of college, covering, on the road in the press pool next to the AP guys, and on the road to cover an event with the president. And I am spending that trip to the club, trying to figure out how to turn my camera on. And
literally the most basic thing to do.
Literally, like, how do I, I'd use some cameras. This was like, oh, I'll grab this camera, I'll grab this SLR, this like Minolta SLR, instead of the cameras that I'd used previously. I'm like, how does this turn on? What's the film advance? And so. So it seems inauspicious, but it turns out tenacity gets you a lot farther than perfect technical know-how, and so I actually ended up winning a statewide award for that coverage, not because I was the world's best photographer, but because I had some chops as a journalist, and I did things like sneak in a whole lot closer than journalists should have been by like actually just buying a ticket to the event and like coming in about, it's like, oh, they're shooting with 600 millimeter lenses. I don't have one of those. I've got a 50 millimeter. So I need to get closer. And so necessity is the mother of invention. I shot some of that on film. I shot also some of that on digital. This is back in 2000, and shooting digital at all. I mean, even people who have started in the past few years, you can feel like an old fogey. You could have started like 4 years ago, and you feel like, I remember when cameras had viewfinders that you look through. Now they're all like a TV. And so, yeah. So the digital camera that I shot this to shot onto a floppy disk, and it kind of maxed out, I think, at like.
Like the Sony right here with the floppy disk drive in it.
That's the like Mavica? Is that
yeah, the FD Mavica, which I'm assuming stands for floppy drive.
That is the exact camera. Either like the Mark II, and why is that sitting there?
It's because it was my first camera as well. It was my first digital camera. We had it in yearbook class, and our middle school bought only one of them. And since I was the editor of the yearbook, I had access to it. And I recently just bought it at a garage sale for $1.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. Yeah, you could just get away with like a perfectly framed photo, no cropping. Could just get away with doing like 3 columns in newsprint. And we actually won a statewide award. And I was like, well, that's cool. Let's try. I picked up a camera, and I got to like meet a president and win an award. Let's actually try like learning this stuff and figuring out. And so then from there, the writing and photography paths kind of they ran parallel to each other, where my skills in one would give me a job in the other, and vice versa. And slowly, the photography kind of took over. So from there, I actually got a job at Columbia University, and I was a writer and photographer for them. And over the course of 4 years, the photography got more and more and more. Until, and then I started doing freelance jobs on the side, first freelance and then eventually, some weddings, which we can talk about. And And so by the time I was there in my last year, my boss, who knew all this other stuff that was going on, is like, why are you showing up to work? Why are you were, I had a full-time freelance gig by the time I left. And of course the answer is, well, this is America and I need health insurance. But also just, there are so, even by then, and this was 2008, there were so few jobs as a photographer where you could earn a paycheck in America, even then, that I was like, I don't know. I want to hang on for this to this as long as I can, just because it seems like I know, it's almost like being a blacksmith now, that you can not, actually have like a paycheck and benefits, even if it wasn't a huge one, as a photographer. So I, basically put in countless hours to be able to do both at the same time, because, one of the reasons that I at least started doing so many weddings is I'm super risk averse. It's really scary to, quit your job and jump into a field where like people might stop hiring you and you might starve to death. And so I said, like, I want to price myself. I want to, get myself, my business to a point where I'm like booking way too many jobs, so that if I have a little bit of a slow year, if things don't kind of work out the same way, then like, I have a little bit of a leeway, So if I'm trying to book 70 weddings and I have a slow year and I book 55, like, I'm totally okay. But if many people like aim for 12, and so if you have a slow year and you book 6, that's not okay, right? Like that's a 50, so that was my that was my thought going into this. And then a lot of the other things that I learned along the way was like basically survival skills picked up from like how do you deal with this, because I had started out, again, not only I would do up to 70 weddings a year, and that was not all I did, right? So I I also used to include engagement shoots with every one of these weddings, and again, I was still doing the corporate and photojournalism work on the side, so it was pretty
Extremely
crazy.
busy time in your life. Yeah,
it was a busy time. Like it was a busy time. But now, of course, as the parent of a young child, anytime I look back and all I can think about is, oh my gosh, how much free time did I have? I had the ability to like occasionally watch a movie. Like I had so much free time.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so strange. I look at my son now, and he's 5, and whenever
awesome.
he'll tell me sometimes, he's like, I'm so bored, and I'm like, you're 5. Like I remember being bored at 5, and there were so many things to do, and now you just don't have that luxury. And that's funny that looking at it at the time, it's like the worst thing in the world to be bored, and now it's looked at as a luxury like that. So I know that we haven't even talked about it yet, and I'm really excited for this, but you are probably most known to a wide range of photographers for your Brenizer Method. So for the about, 5 people out there who don't know what the Brenizer Method is, could you kind of quickly describe what it is before I go into my next question?
Yes, yeah. So to make this as simple as possible, basically what the method is itself is just simply if you do a panoramas, like if you know what a panorama is, and now like phones do it and all this kind of stuff. Generally, we use panoramas to make a picture that's very wide, or a picture that's just huge, right? It just has like an incredible amount of megapixels and detail and sharpness, but what you're really doing is you're taking the characteristics of a lens and just widening it, characteristics of your sensor, of your camera, whatever it is, and you're plopping it all over. So it's like you had a bigger camera. It's like you had a wider lens. And so I said to myself one day, again, more than 10 years ago, or about 10 years ago, what I really love these fast, long lenses that I have. I love the depth of field of like the 85-1.4. I had the 70-200, at 200-2.8, wide open. And I said, I would love to have that shallow depth of field, that isolation of subject, but I don't want to take a narrow. I have a photo in my mind, and it's kind of a wider photo. I would love to kind of get that effect that you see in like large format cameras, where you have a wide field where you're shooting either a landscape or something. You see like the old Civil War photos, and you see like a guy standing there, and you see the full person, and he's and all of his environment, but there's a really shallow depth of field because they're using huge 8x10 cameras. And so I kind of like looked down at my at my lens, and I'd been doing all these panoramas that day because I was in Ireland and just wanted to do traditional panoramas, and I said, wait a second, there's no reason this won't work. So basically shooting wide open, with one of these long, fast lenses, something that gives you this really shallow depth of field. If you do a panorama with a certain set of fairly normal panoramic rules, setting your aperture, your ISO, like locking your exposure, locking your focus, and you take anywhere between, I've seen them done with as few as 3 photos, and of course I've done them myself with as many as like 200. You can kind of quickly make this effect, and I took it home. I took all these images, back to the hotel that day, and it worked out better than I could have dreamed of. You're able to take these kind of like landscapey, wider images and have a shallow depth of field effect to them. So there's a lot of, like, it's at its base level, it's all math, but there's a lot of ways to then to like translate that and understand it. In a way, it's like if you had a scene and what you had on you was a 24 millimeter f/0.3 lens, but it's really also like you were carrying around a large format camera, so it's basically for people who have ever tried a DSLR or a full frame camera versus a APS-C camera, or even have moved up to an APS-C camera versus a phone, right? Or even your own eye. Like when you see things with your eye, everything's pretty much in focus. Mm-hmm. And when you take a photo with a phone, unless you're using portrait mode or something like that, but everything's pretty much in focus because the sensor is very small. And so as the sensor gets larger, you have a lot more control over that, isolating depth of field effect. And so what you realize is when you're doing a panorama, the thing that's actually changing, the thing that's actually overlapping is the sensor, mm-hmm. right? Is your film, it's the same lens, it's the same, everything else, your same exposure. And so what's actually happening is with every photo, you're making your sensor slightly larger. And so you just multiply that effect. The important thing is that like you can make really good photos out of it. Like it's fun to do tricks on a technical level. It's fun to learn new things, and mm-hmm. it's definitely fun to do things that are otherwise impossible. But then to like take it out and say, okay, now I effectively have like a 24 millimeter f/0.4 lens. What is a good photo that I could take with that, right? Because no photo is good because it was taken in a certain aperture. No photo is good because it was taken at a certain focal length. So my favorite thing is always when a client who has, plenty of my clients have no idea what the Brenizer method is. I don't like lead with that. And so my favorite thing is when one of these clients who have no idea what it is still say, this is my favorite photo because the shallowness of the depth of field also tied in well with the emotional feeling of the photo and the beauty of it. And so it's fun. It's great to like. I mean, the biggest thing is it's so hard to do anything new ever. There's so many photographers, and so it's fun to kind of have pretty much done that. To like have stumbled across this myself, and it was something that again, like people here and there had kind of like gone the same process that I had, but no one had really like taken it and ran with it, and so it's fun to have done that, and now to like be in this position. I think the funniest reaction I have had, and there's been a lot, is, somebody met me once and said, Brenizer, like the method. And I was like, yeah, yeah. So I thought that guy was long dead. Because if anything is named after anyone,
right.
That person is dead, so it's like, no, I'm still kicking around.
And still doing it all the time.
Yeah,
That's too funny.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, but it's really fun to see how people have taken it and ran with it.
yeah, no, I can imagine. I think that it's cool that essentially you just went out and, like you said, there's not really a lot of new things happening. It's kind of hard to discover something new in photography. So you just really have to go out and find these things by experimenting. So
Yeah.
When you're starting out, it could be a struggle. I've learned from a lot of listeners just to learn how to shoot manual. But let's say once you've got that, once you become confident shooting in manual, where should you be focusing your time and energy next to get better?
Yeah, and there's even I would even question, you always have to look at your own life and evolution before you even say, is the most important thing for me right now to learn to shoot manual, right? Because there's a whole lot of other things to learn as well. It is to be a well-rounded photographer, to be, especially a professional photographer, where the thing is, if things start to go wrong as a professional photographer, like, it's a big deal, right? So you really should be able to shoot manual, if only for, it's like being able to make change, right? Like, there's a change making machine, but if it's at your job and the change making machine breaks down and you can't make change, then you're in trouble. But and so knowing the kinds of things that allow you to shoot manual will help you, especially in a professional situation, deal with any problems that arise. Like, because things can, okay, but then all of a sudden you have to go indoors and outdoors, or you just get into a partially cloudy day, or you're shooting backlit and things like that. But for people who, it's not the most important thing, when you're starting out. Let's say you're shooting people, it's way harder and way more important to learn how to get good expressions out of people, right? Especially with the equipment today. One of the things that helped me early on, I guess, was realizing not only that I didn't know everything, but also that, like, the stuff that I was good at wasn't more important just because that was the stuff that I was good at. So I was relatively, I know math and all this, and I grasped technical details fairly easily. And so for a lot of people, and this happens to be, happens to more often be men, people, say, like, oh, I'm really good at shooting manual, right? And so then therefore that makes me a better photographer than somebody who's not. And the thing is, that's not true at all. I'd already been working in the field a long time before I ever took a photography class. And so I think a lot of the things, like stumbling across the method and a lot of the processes that I just do still in my work life are things that I stumbled into, and just learning, whether it's processing or, in some ways of shooting and lighting, are things that I just like, I have this. I'm just going to, like, sit here and play with this all day and try things, things that maybe I could have saved myself 100 hours by just, like, looking something up online. But they didn't have many resources then. And I learned different things and kind of came across it in different ways because I'd stumbled into it, because I had said, oh, this is what's going to, make it work for me now. So the biggest thing is just, and that's why photography has gotten so much better so quickly overall, is that with a digital camera, of course, you can just sit there and play, and you can just, like, take photos and see what this does. So manual is part of this, but there's so much more to it. That really the important thing when you're starting out as a photographer is learning to see the way that your camera sees. So being able to walk around and say, if I have this camera and if I have this lens on, and if this lens was set kind of like this, and I took a photo in that direction, what would it look like? And that's important for so many reasons. But the main one is that, for photography, pre-visualization is crucial.
Right.
Especially if you're shooting people, or anything with moving targets, because by the time the moment happens, it's too late to photograph it. You can't see the moment and then decide to put your finger down, or certainly can't see the moment and then decide to bring the camera up to your eye. You have to anticipate it. And so by the time you anticipate it, you have to know that like the photo you're taking is going to look the way you want it to look. Mm-hmm. And so it's all about pre-visualization, even, also when you're doing things that are more set up, when you're doing things with portraiture, you have a little bit of leeway of saying, like, of going in and testing and saying, I'm going to take this. Oh, it's overexposed. I'm going to come in. Okay, it's under. But it certainly saves you a lot of time, and will guide you along the way if you're able to say, here are my tools, and here's what I can do with them, and here's how it's going to look. Right. So it's also, the thing is, especially for people starting out, like, this is also like so fun. Like, this is the fun part of photography, of course, is saying like, okay, I got this thing, and this thing sees differently than my eyes do. So like, let's explore with that. Whatever it is, it could be, again, it could be your phone. You're like, there's so many, like, the most interesting things in photography right now are happening with phones, in terms of tech and R&D and like what that means. Yes. A new app comes out and it can do this thing you've never seen before. And like, oh my gosh, there's new things that I can do as a photographer. And that's just with a phone. So it's nice to always then, say to yourself, like, another reason that people tend to advance further when they get a DSLR, when they get an interchangeable lens camera, part of it is just motivation to like make the expense worth it. But part of it is like, every time you put on a new lens, you're putting on a new set of eyes. So, the first time I got, an $80 50mm 1.8, I was like, oh my God, like I have to move my feet all the time now. And I have this new lens. It has a point of view. It sees in a different way. It has a shallower depth of field. These are all things just like walking around town then and saying, taking 1,000, 10,000 photos before, like, this is exactly what it's going to look like when I take this photo with this lens. And so, and part of that is even knowing before the camera comes up to your eye, here are the edges of my frame. Mm-hmm. I know, I can tell you right now, the lenses that, shoot most with, I just looking around the room at any time, I can tell you what I could capture with a 24, what I could capture with a 35, what I could capture with an 85. Like, where those frames, I have like rangefinder lines in my brain, basically, which is super handy because, for me as an event photographer shooting a lot, it means the camera doesn't actually have to be up in front of my eye mm-hmm. to see what I'm going to capture in the world. So right. I could even just like, no, okay, if I'm going to use an 85 right here and I want a head and shoulders or something, I have to take a step back, or I even have to take, I have to go 3 inches in, whatever it is, which is, allows you to see your peripheral, a lot better. But also then things like, what's the difference between my camera and my eye in terms of contrast? Cameras tend to be a lot more contrasty, in terms of their color than the way that we see. And to have less dynamic range, which is part of that. And again, especially also in terms of like what would be in focus and what wouldn't be, and how does that all affect the photo? Like all that, if you focus on that stuff, like that's also exciting when you're starting out. Like I'm so jealous of people who are starting out as photographers, because like if you work at it, you get better every day or every week, and like it's so intoxicating to like get better at something, whereas if you've been in it for a decade or two, it's like getting better is like watching the hour hand of a clock, like so I always like try and seek out new different things or aspects that I haven't done as much, because that allows me that intoxicating feeling of being new again, of saying like, wow, here's here's a different way to do this really esoteric thing, or even just to approach this like sub menu of Photoshop somewhere, because the learning is something that is part of what made it so much fun to begin with.
Right. I got to tell you, the other day I was actually watching a video from you on YouTube about a Lightroom like post workflow, and your tip in Lightroom to match like exposures, I believe it was, totally changed the game. There's so many times where it's like the first exposure I get is either over or under, and then quickly I change it, and just having that one little tip rocked. So I appreciate you going through all these menus to find these things and share them with us. That is awesome.
Oh, my pleasure. And and I still do. Like, I've tweaked my Lightroom workflow like 3 times in the past week. What's funny is I actually I stumbled on something that I really like by going back to the way that I edited photos before Lightroom existed, right? Because, I realized like, oh, I have a decade and a half of experience in Photoshop before Lightroom even came out. Like, maybe I should actually like use that more often. And, but like some of these things that I just had come together that no one taught me, but I was like, and so that's probably the wrong way to do it. But it like really has worked for me. Right. I always actually get very self-conscious when I'm doing any kind of post-processing tutorial because I'm so self-taught that I know that like half the ways that I do things are wrong. Right. When I used to throw together composites like super quickly, like I would shoot and edit a composite on a wedding day. So I'm trying to edit in about 2 minutes, and I'd put on a layer and I just take the eraser and just delete it, and just like because I'm just trying to brush things out. And I'm showing that to people, and I've been using layer masks now for like 5 years, but I just know like if like any like graphic designer watching me like take an eraser tool to a layer mask is just having a heart attack. And I'm like, look, the point for me is to like make this work in 2 minutes, or just like to like kind of cob my way around to make this work. Yeah,
well, I don't know. I guess you can't be looked at as like knowledgeable or a master at everything. So if a graphic designer says that you're doing something wrong, screw them. Like if you can do it, who cares? Who cares?
If it makes the photo good and it's not incredibly inefficient, then it's fine for your purpose.
I think that perfectly sums up the phrase "the end justifies the means" right there.
Right.
Yeah. Is there one piece of information that you hear being told to new photographers that is it's either wrong or it's just incomplete information?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you probably hit on it already with the idea that it's super important to like learn to shoot manual first. Again, it's one of the things in your toolbox. But I think just to expound upon that, and again, I'm thinking about these anecdotes that I didn't even get to, is again like thinking that the technical stuff, A, is what matters most, and B is what you need to focus on, because you are going to pick that up along the way, because it's like that's the fun part for people who will be watching this. Like that's the fun stuff. So you're going to learn this. You're going to pick this up along the way. And it's important in as much as it allows you to consistently create the kinds of photos that you want. And so, if you're dealing with a certain kind of consistency, to be able to, work your way around problems and to like, create specific things, that's when, learning to shoot manual becomes important. But like, more importantly, it's the lessons that you learn along the way of like what an aperture is and does. Like that stuff, is important because it allows you to create certain things. But again, if you're working with people, it is much, much harder and so much more important to learn get people to open up to, emotional connection. And again, I think what I was getting at, and I went off on another tangent before when I said that I was open to these things early on as a very technical photographer. I could have said, so I was at this photography school, and a woman, who was another fellow student, she comes to me and she asked me literally for how to turn on her flash, right? And so now this is, I've learned how to turn on a camera. This is like 10 years later. And so she's like, I got this flash. I've heard that I should, use a flash sometimes. And how do I put this on my camera? How do I make it turn on? Now I could have been, I could have had condescension. I could have said, well, I know so much more about the technical aspects of photography right now that makes me a better photographer. Mm-hmm. But I had seen this woman's work, and she was way better than I was at that time because, she didn't have the technical aspects, but her emotional work was absolutely off the charts. She was in the middle of she was doing a documentary on a family that had just gotten a divorce. They had 2 children. They had just gotten a divorce. And she said, you know what I want to do for my school project? I want to document this divorce. I want to go in there and photograph the children and them. And I want to go to their lawyer meetings. And it was heartbreaking, incredible documentary work. And and I'm going to say but she doesn't know how to use the flash. Right. No. So she was somebody who was inspiring to me. It's being able to take the things that you learn and say, what are the things that I don't know? And that's not even like things that you would necessarily find in a photography textbook. So the easiest part of any photo is actually clicking the shutter, making your settings, clicking the shutter and having it turn out like a photo. I mean, especially now with the cameras that we have these days. The hard part is getting to where the good stuff is happening in front of your camera. And that's true for any kind of photo. So, if you're a wildlife photographer, you need, to get that stuff happening, you need an incredible amount of patience, patience that I don't have. That's why I'm not a wildlife photographer, right? If you're photographing people, you need to get to a place where the good expressions are happening in front of your camera, where they're open and you're photographing them in a flattering way. If you're, as a photojournalist, not only do you have to get to the location, but then you have to physically get yourself in the position, in the angle that will show the good stuff happening, in relation to each other. All of that, that's the art of seeing. So saying to yourself first, okay, what's the stuff that I like? What is it that I want to do? And it could be landscapes, it could be still life, it could be weddings, it could be, portraiture, it could be absolutely anything. But then saying what are the things that I would have to do to make this happen in front of my camera? And especially if it's anything that involves people, it's learning how do I make these expressions happen? How do I make people comfortable in front of the camera, given that I know that that's an inherently uncomfortable place to be, given that I'm probably on the back end of the camera because I also find it to be an uncomfortable place to be. So so how do I make these things happen? It's so much harder. I could take people in an afternoon and I can take them through and I can teach them the basics of lighting. But if you are not good or comfortable with making people comfortable in their own skin, that's going to take a lot more time.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I wish that I would have known that piece of information when I first started. But as most photographers, they just get excited about the technicals, and then they go through that avenue and they don't spend too much time making people feel comfortable. So that was a great tip.
Yeah, and it's fun. And again, especially if you're a professional photographer, the important aspect of the technical is simply consistency and being able to the technique is something that allows you to get the effect that you want in a large array of situations, right? So it is handy to say, to be able to get yourself into a situation where, let's say I want to do portraits, or let's say you just want to do general photojournalism, and saying, okay, but can I still do it when I go into a dark room? Can I still do it when it's nighttime? Can I still do it when the light is incredibly harsh and awful? And that's what the technical aspects are about. But there's so much more of just defining for you what a good photo is and how you get in those situations that are worth photographing in the first place, that are even more important.
Of course. Man, Ryan, I feel like I have 100,000 more questions to ask you, but we've run out of time. I really want to be mindful of your time. I know that you have an infant over there, and I don't want to take you away from that family time. So, Ryan, can you let all the listeners know where they can find you online?
Yes. Yes. Well, I have merged with my wife, and we have a recently revamped website, which is just thebrenizers.com. Our Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff now aligns. It's the Brenizers, and if you can't spell it, just put it in Google. It'll probably autocorrect for you.
Google's pretty good
And
for that.
yeah. Now it'll find the Brenizer Method. So, it's super, super, super exciting. And that is kind of the launching off point. We also do teach workshops, and I just like the URL for it, so I'll mention that. It is makeitwork.shop, because the title of the workshop is Make It Workshop, because, again, learning the technical aspects is all about what do you do when everything kind of sucks, when
Right.
the aspects of the scene are working against you. So I want to teach people then, how do you deal with that situation so that you can achieve the effects that you want in any kind of situation? So
There's a lot of
those are
bad
the
situations at weddings, so I'm sure that
uh,
that your workshop has got to be full of a ton of great information. Well, Ryan, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I really look forward to seeing what you have coming out in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Hoo-wee. How did you feel about that interview with Ryan Brenizer? I know that's going to be an episode that you will want to listen to more than once. It may not seem like it now, but trust me, there's a lot of great information in that podcast that I really hope that you picked up on. And I know that even me, I was there talking with Ryan, right here where I'm standing, through Skype. We had a conversation. But it wasn't until I actually edited the episode together that I feel like I got a better understanding of the episode, that I got a better understanding of what it was that he was trying to say. And it brought the whole interview together. And I really hope that you go back and listen to this one more time. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this week, but one time in the future, sometime this month, that you'll listen to it just one more time, because I guarantee that if you do, you will pick up one more piece of information that is going to be so much more valuable than it was today. This is that kind of interview. It's going to last, I don't want to say decades. I was just going to say decades or generations, but that's pretty pompous. I don't know. This is the internet. Anyway, this is an interview that's going to last a long time, and I know that you're going to continue to get information out of this one. So if there was a way to favorite podcasts in the iTunes podcast app, which there's not, which is, you would think would just be common sense, but anyway, remember this one. You know, the biggest thing that I picked up from this interview was, it was probably Ryan's take on the information that he hears being misinformed to you, the beginners. And I obviously am a portion of that. I bring information to you and I say, here's your information. You can do with it what you like, right? And I can point you in a direction, right? Just through my experience. And Ryan's take on that you don't need to learn manual right away, I think was big for me. Because it just, for me, makes sense. Being a professional photographer, I can't imagine not learning manual. I can't imagine like doing my job without knowing manual. But that's not what he's saying. So again, now see, listen to me. I'm going through the conversation that we had, and I just picked up something completely different than how I heard it while we were talking and how I edited it. Okay, well, so obviously the professional photographer wouldn't not know manual, but what Ryan is saying is that when you're first starting out, learning manual may not be the most important aspect, and it depends on what it is that you're shooting. And I really thought that it was a fresh take that obviously if you're working with people, with humans who have to be in front of the camera, learning how to interact with them while literally having a barrier up in front of your face is much more important than I guess, being able to change your exposure triangle with compensation of ISO or aperture or something like that. So it was a really refreshing take, and I really appreciated his honesty throughout the entire interview. I truly enjoyed it. Ryan, man, if you're listening right now, I truly appreciate your time. It was a blast talking to you, and I would love to have you on again in the future. I hope that you learned something new today, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself. I hope that this interview has inspired you to get out there and for you to try something. I know that it was, Ryan said that it's hard to find something new or new techniques in photography, but at the same time, you are at this spot that is so fun and new and enjoyable, and you're learning something all the time. And that energy should just be infectious, and you should go out there and just try something new all the time. That's it. I'm going to leave you with that. So until next week, I really want you guys to get out there. I want you to have fun, take more photos, stay safe, and I will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.